The Valley Boys is the best group in the world. Hello, Junkanoo world. My name is Marcel Major. Most people know me as BOP. That's B-O-P. P as in prosperous. I'm a 48-year-old Junkanoo enthusiast. I'm the owner and operator of this wonderful establishment we see here. It's called the Four Seasons Nursery and Landscaping. I've been a Junkanooer for almost all of my life. From I know myself, I've come through the ranks of the Vikings. The Vikings back in the day of the Cat and the Fiddle. Most of you Junkanoos today probably don't even know about the Cat and the Fiddle. If there was to be a trivia question as to where the Cat and the Fiddle is or was, I guess most of you probably wouldn't even know. But the Cat and the Fiddle is where the Commonwealth Bank is in Oaksfield opposite the College of the Bahamas. That's where the roots of my Junkanoo experience or my lifetime of being a Junkanoo started with the Vikings. And I came through the ranks with the Vikings and eventually moved on to where I am today with the world famous, best in the world, Valley Boys as a part of the now Scraper Nation. Big shout out to the Scraper Nation. All right, my Junkanoo experience started from I know myself. Living in the Chippingham area, everybody knows that the Vikings was mainly a Chippingham group. And I've started from very small, on Tyler Street here with the Vikings, with the likes of Gordo and Bird and my brother-in-law Michael Smith and his brother Roger Smith, and it was a whole heap of us. Parrot. We started out, first of all, I think we started in Davis Street. That's when Junkanoo was really prehistoric, as most of you may not know. That's when we used to use the fringing with the shares. Back in the day, we used to paste with the flower pop. God help you if you didn't put the kerosene oil in the flower pop or whatever have you, because if you didn't back then, the roaches will eat you alive. But those were the good old days in Junkanoo back then. Like I said, we came through the ranks on Davis Street, building the costumes with the chicken coop wire. You're forming it with your hand, and then using the cardboard and the contact to form it. So the Junkanoos evolved, and those were the days when I really started my Junkanoo experience. Junkanoo back then was exciting time for me. I mean, I was just a Junkanoo fanatic back then. Junkanoo couldn't come on TV. Anytime Junkanoo on TV, I was a crazy fool. My family thought I was just literally a Junkanoo fanatic. And so we started out on Davis Street with Parish and Gordo and all of those. My first parade, if I could remember correctly, I think we had brought the birds, the bees. That's my first time with the Vikings, and boy, that was an exciting time. I must have been about maybe 9 or 10 then. And it was really an exciting time for me. We moved from, my Junkanoo experience then moved from the Vikings to the Valley Boys, because I really needed the Vikings wasn't living up to my expectations back then. I can remember days and on parades when the Vikings we have so much excitement and enthusiasm trying to get to Bay Street, and all of a sudden the Vikings would just hold back, and that was a crushing experience for most of the Vikings back in the day. We would always never be able to make it on Bay Street for Boxing Day. We would hold back for New Year's and still wouldn't be ready. And so I said, you know what, man, I got enough of this. And I decided to try to move on to a bigger and better group. And God had it so that Chris Moss, he lived in the Chippingham area. And Chris Moss started to build his costume in a house down in Chippingham. And being the Junkanoo enthusiast that I was, I would just go to his house every day, and I would watch him build and I would watch him pace. And I became so entrenched and so enthused and so mesmerized by the Valley Boys, I had to become a part of the Valley Boys. And so that's where my genesis from becoming a Valley Boy started, with Chris Moss, right here in Chippingham. And of course, my family, my brothers, everybody know my brother from Roots, Thunder. If you're a Roots and you don't know Thunder, then you're a Roots fan. That's my oldest brother. And then I have another brother, Gubber. All of us were part of the Vikings back then, but they moved on to Roots, and I moved on to the Valley Boys. And that caused a big ruckus in my family. They figured, oh man, you're only going to the Valley Boys, because they used to call us the blonde-haired, blue-eyed fellas back in the day, because we used to stay cutting the hip. But it is what it is. And so I moved on with the Valley Boys. And eventually I said to Chris Moss, I said, man, I got to rush for joy, because rushing with the Vikings was a horrible experience. And so Chris Moss said, you know what to do? Just check with Marvin. I guess most of you know him in the Valley Boys as Stopper. And so I said, Marvin, look here, man, I need to rush. And I need to rush with a sensible group, a group which can allow me to experience the true essence of Junkanoo. And he said, all right, come, man, come. And we met at his house. And I think it was in I can't remember the year, but it was the year that the Valley Boys had brought Spellbound. I think it was Spellbound or A Child's Prayer. And I believe we won that morning with that. That's the morning when the brass section played Mary Had a Little Lamb. And boy, that resonated with me for years, because that was my first Valley Boys experience with Spellbound and Marvin. And Marvin, you know him as Stopper, he built my first costume. And it was that when I could remember it was Hans the Bella, the lead Bella, Nahi and I. Hans was a little boy then. Hans was such a little fella that his mom used to drop him and pick him up. Had to pick him up at a certain time. But that was way back when. Most of you probably wouldn't even remember those days. But that's how I got introduced to rushing with the world famous Valley Boys. And from then, the rest is history. Junkanoo to me is life. Junkanoo to me is a spirit. Junkanoo to me is a living, breathing organism. It embodies all that is, all that we are, and all that we ought to be as a true and authentic Bahamian. From being small, like I say, my roots from Junkanoo stem way back from the Vikings. And from coming from a Junkanoo family, I know myself from the beat and the music and the costuming and everything about Junkanoo has attracted me to Junkanoo, where it almost made me a Junkanoo fanatic. And I'm not apologetic about that at all, because to me, to be Bahamian is to be a Junkanooer. And from growing up with my brothers, growing up to the Vikings, I knew that this was me, that I had to be a part of this experience. It was so bad that I could remember a time when I tried not to rush. And so I went to the parade with my sisters, and they can tell you this. This is a story that they tell everybody about me as being a Junkanoo fanatic. I could remember one parade, I said, you know what, man, I ain't fooling with this parade this year. And so I think this is when they had just introduced the bleachers. It wasn't as fancy as they are now, but it was the wooden bleachers that I think the ministry had decided to put on Bay Street. And I said, you know, I can sit in the bleachers this year. And I sat in the bleachers, and when that first group passed, I said, hold on, man, I can't take it. That was the time when I was rushing with the Vikings back then too. And sure enough, I think the Vikings, must have been a New Year's parade, because it couldn't have been a Boxing Day parade, because if the Vikings was coming out, you know the Vikings always hold back. And so by the time as that first group passed, I said, I can't take this no more. I left the bleachers, I ran home, ran the mic. I think I must have either ran home, I can't remember, I ran home, because I live in Chippingham right from downtown. It only took me about maybe 15, 20 minutes to run home. I put some old pieces of costume together, and by the time as the Vikings was by John Bull, I was in the parade rushing. I said, to hell with this. I couldn't take it. When that music gets into your soul and into your spirit, it's a living, breathing organism, and you got to be responsive to that spirit. And I think that was my most memorable Junkanoo experience, because by the time as the Vikings was up in Rawson Square, I was off the bleachers and I was in the parade with some old piece of costume, but it didn't matter. All I wanted to do was rush, and because the Vikings were who the Vikings were, it didn't matter what costume I had. They needed me to make up the numbers, but I'm just saying that to say this, that it's in the blood, it's in the spirit, it's a movement, it's a living and a breathing organism that you just can't help but be a part of if you are a Bahamian. Your whole life is consumed by Junkanoo, especially when the parades, when the fever starts, when the costumes start to be built. It actually consumes you, and if you don't like really step back and step out and say, you know what, I need to take a break, or I need to prioritize, it will consume you. And the most sacrifice, the sacrifice that I think that I've made personally, it's a couple of things that I would contribute as a sacrifice. The main sacrifice is, at the time, my wife, she didn't like Junkanoo. When I was a newlywed. I was back in 1995. Dating, she knew that I was a Junkanooer, but after we got married, Junkanoo now took over the house, took over my life, and it started to interfere with my relationship with my wife and my family. And so I had to step back, and I had to say, you know what, is this sacrifice really worth it? But being a Junkanoo that I am, was, and is, I say yes. Christmas dinner is not Christmas dinner unless you're battling, unless you're spending that last couple of minutes trying to trick up your costume or trying to paste that last piece of pants or shirt. And that in itself is a sacrifice, because what it does, it eats into your family time, and it takes away the time that you have to really spend with your family at such a very special and momentous occasion as the Christmas. The Christmas season is one of the best seasons in the entire year. And for you to now have to sacrifice your time, all your energy, you're already tired because you've been in the shack all day, all night, and still you have to turn around and on Christmas Day, spend time away from your family for Christmas dinner. That in itself is a big sacrifice. Recently, I've experienced a severe knee injury, and I was not supposed to be rushing. And when the Labor Day parade came around, I said to myself, I said, you know what, the hell with this injury. I can't allow the parade to pass me by with not being able to participate. And it came to a point where the time was actually coming when the parade was it's about 2 or 3 days away. And I say, and the guys in the Scraper Nation, big up to the Scraper Nations, the Valley Boys Scraper Nation, they say, man, Bop, you coming? Everybody calls me Bop. If you call me Bop, that means you know me, because Bop is a nickname that I've had from small. You know, every Junkanoo have a nickname, but Bop is my nickname. And the guys in the Scraper Nation said, Bop, you're rushing? We know you got an injury, you're rushing. I said, guys, they started to plan, and they started to say what they're going to, the costume is going to be like, and what they wanted to wear for the Labor Day parade. I said, you know what, guys? Include me in your plannings, because if I know myself, I may have this injury, but I know when that music and that spirit hit me, I'm going to be right there rushing with you guys. And sure enough, Labor Day came, and I was right there rushing to the point where my family thought that I was home. My sister-in-law said she was about to call me to ask me if I was going to the parade. And she said, you know what, I'm not going to call him because I know he's mad. He can't rush because he have the knee injury. And I know he's home. And she said, I'm not going to call him. And when I rushed down, I was coming out of Rawson Square heading into Scotiabank. And I looked and I saw her in the corner of my eyes. And when she saw me, she was like, what the hell are you doing on this parade? Because they knew I had a very severe knee injury. And I just rushed and I pointed to the knee and I was pointing to my knee. I said, guys, just hug me, but I ain't coming on this parade. And it was like, that just goes to show you the essence and the power that Junkanoo has over the Bahamian and the Bahamian populace as the number one cultural experience. Goal, I really learned a lot from Goal. That's where most of my building, a little bit of building experience that I have, came from Goal and Bats and Eggy Boom. Because I could remember a costume that Eggy Boom built for me. Boy, that was a disaster that time. It was a costume, that particular time was my worst Junkanoo experience, if I may say that. No offense to Eggy Boom, it was just that the costume wasn't balanced. And we didn't actually try the costume on before the parade. And he built a costume for my friend and I, Peter. Peter Ramis, he's a good buddy of mine. We graduated from St. Augustine's College together. And Eggy Boom built this costume. That's when he was in the Marigold Farms area down out Fox Hill. And Eggy Boom built this costume, man. It was the snakes. I don't remember what the theme was for the Valley Boys. And we patient. We built that costume and we spent many nights by my mom's house, me and Peter, my friend Peter from SAC. We spent nights in, day out, building this costume, pasting this costume, and come to find out, I think that was the breaking point for me when I decided, you know what? I ain't spending no more money on Junkanoo because it was too much money. Eggy Boom built that costume. We spent, I think this was the time I was married at the time too. And I think I spent close to almost $1,800, $2,000 on tricks for that costume. And that dipped into my children's Christmas expenses. That it was like a sacrifice at that time. And I put so much time into that costume, and up to this day, Doyle Barrow is still teasing me about that costume. When we reach on Bay Street by the Christchurch Cathedral, we getting ready to line up. I put the costume on. Peter put his costume on. Man, we put that costume on. It was a costume with a shoulder piece, and it had a snake head on the top. When we put the costume on, man, that snake fall down, and that snake make a bow by Christchurch Cathedral, and that crack in half. Almost, like I said, about $1,800 to $2,000 gone down the drain. That was a cursing and a crying and every emotion you could think about moment at that time, man. I go on, I say, Peter, boy, I still rushing. I throw that old snake costume and I throw that down. And I think must have had a little skirt. I put the skirt on. I go on down Bay Street. And when I saw my wife, she laughing at me, and I mad. I said, let's them mad where you won't cry. I said, she laughing, and I mad. She saying, well, I say, costume breakdown. And then she laughing at me, boy. But I think that was the worst experience I've ever had. And to this day, Doyle Barrow still teases me about those snakes that never left, that never made Bay Street. But be that as it may, no offense to you, Eggy Boom. That was back in the day. I think he was probably just getting into building. But you know you're the number one builder nowadays. But that was back in the day. And that was the worst experience for me. All right, my most memorable rush, if I could remember correctly, was when the Valley Boys brought Rome. I think that was the most spectacular parade in all of my 40-odd years of Junkanoo experience. That parade was just out of this world. The Valley Boys didn't even have to rush. All they had to do was walk down Bay Street, and everybody knew that morning that it was over. The Valley Boys had won. And I think for me, I was so happy to have been a part of that Rome experience that I think it was the best parade ever, not only for me, for the Junkanoo world, for the Junkanoo. If you were to ask any Junkanoo, and if they were to be honest with themselves, they would tell you that Rome, that the great Roman Empire that the Valley Boys brought out was the best parade to ever hit Bay Street. I think for me, that was the best parade. And that was my most memorable rushing experience ever. Competition for me, if I were to backtrack back into the days of my experience with the Vikings, I didn't like how competition was back in the day, because it always seems that no matter what any other group brought to Bay Street, it would have always been with the Valley Boys and the Saxons. I didn't think back in the day that the competition was fair. It always seems being a part of another group back in the day, not being a part of the Valley Boys or the Saxons. To me, I think the competition was somewhat one-sided, or may I say two-sided, where it either was the Valley Boys or the Saxons that always won the parade, no matter how good the music makers may have looked back in the day, no matter how good the Vikings may have looked back in the day. It just seems that the judges just went to Bay Street to judge the Valley Boys and the Saxons, and it was demoralizing. It dampened a lot of Junkanoo's spirit, and it just became an unfair experience for me personally. And not until I think I started to get involved with the Valley Boys, and I started to see the parade from a different perspective. And I understood, and I started to understand all the intricacies of what it takes to get a parade to Bay Street, the costuming, the music, the theme, the execution of the theme, the whole research of the theme. Not until then that I understand that, hey, the judging system had to change somewhat. And I was happy to know that they made some adjustments to the judging system, especially when One Family came around and Roots came around, and they now realize that, hey, this Junkanoo world is not only based on the Saxons and the Valley Boys. And so the competition caused the judges and the judging system to be revamped, to be revisited, to be restructured to allow fair and balanced judging. And ever since, I think, when Roots came around and Roots won the parade, and then I think then One Family came around and they won the Boxing Day parade, it then gave Junkanooers a different light, a different perspective on how the actual parade is judged. But if I must be honest, I think back in the day, it wasn't fair. It was too biased. It was too biased for the Valley Boys and the Saxons. But in recent times, I think the judging system has been fair. Because I started judging, I think, in 2006. And I was invited to judge by Charmaine. Charmaine being a Chippingham, a young lady from Chippingham, myself being a young man from Chippingham and growing up with Junkanoo. And I wanted to take a little break from Junkanoo, and I got to talking with her, and she was in charge of the judging system. And so she said, Marcel, come and come and judge. And so in 2006, I was able to get a full experience of the whole Junkanoo experience. I was able to see a Junkanoo from a different perspective, because I would have experienced it from actually rushing, and now I experience it from the judging aspect. And after that experience in 2006 in judging, I realized that from the system that, I don't know whether Charmaine would have developed the system or the JCNP or whoever developed the system, it seemed to have some semblance of fairness to it. After going through the training, going through the weeks of coursework, going through the simulation of the actual parade, I realized that the system that I know it to be, judging system, from being a part of it, it seemed to be fair, based on how it was, how the judges were selected, the actual process itself. A lot of people would disagree with me because, of course, every time a result comes out, there's always a group that believe that they were cheated, or there's a group that believe that the judging system had more of one bias of set of people, like more Saxons involved. But that is not the case. If you were to experience Junkanoo from rushing and experience it from being a part of the actual judging system, you would then get a better appreciation of the judging system itself. Junkanoo can be used to effect positive change simply by the mere fact that what Junkanoo does, it pulls young men and young women into an environment, into an atmosphere where they are allowed to express themselves, where they are allowed to spend time, energy, talent. And it affects change because it allows young men that would ordinarily would have been doing untoward things, would have been doing things on the street, getting into mischief, getting into trouble. Because if you realize, Junkanoo is almost year-round. And I'm not sure if statistic will prove this, but statistically or generally speaking, you would find that when the Junkanoo is in its high season, crime and murder and all these other ills in society, it's at its all-time minimum. Why? Because the young men and the young women are spending time developing a culture, developing a craft, spending time developing their talent and expressing themselves in an art form that is more than likely, practically consumes you. And so that's how I feel that Junkanoo actually can be is an expression of a positive outlook on society. If I were to describe Junkanoo and my vision for Junkanoo in the future, first of all, I'd like to express somewhat of a disappointment in where Junkanoo is today. A disappointment in the fact that our current leaders, I wouldn't want to single out just the Prime Minister himself, but our current leaders are Junkanooers. And it was disappointing to me to hear the Prime Minister said, I think it was about two seasons ago, when he said that Junkanoo is boring. Junkanoo, it needs to be, in so many words, Junkanoo wasn't where it ought to have been in terms of the actual overall parade itself, the running and the executing and the management and the overall parade itself. And when he said that on the news, it's public knowledge, I was disappointed in those comments simply because him coming from a Junkanoo background, a Junkanoo experience, I would think that he would have put more energy and more time and more resources into bringing the culture and the craft to where he would like it to be. And this would have been his second term as the Prime Minister. Not knocking him, mind, he's done well for the country. He's been a good Prime Minister, I must say. But I just think that as a Junkanooer himself, being in the trenches and being a part of Junkanoo, I just think that the government, or his administration in particular, should have put more emphasis and more time and more energy into the development of Junkanoo. 44 years later, in my opinion, I don't think that Junkanooers or Junkanoo groups should be looking for plots of land. They should have already had plots of land, crown land, donated to them. They should have already had in the budget The budget should include a budget for groups, A groups, B groups, etc., that meets a certain requirement. Junkanoo, like I said, should be promoted around the world. Anytime the prime minister or whatever who's representing the country at a world event or at a meeting or whatever, have an entourage of Junkanoo should accompany him. I think Junkanoo should be in everything and anything that is Bahamian. Junkanoo should have had its own park, a park or somewhat of a village where the parade can be held, and you can even have parades year-round where a fee can be taken for tourists to actually see the parade year-round. So when the Chinese came to us and say, listen, man, we would like to give you a gift of a stadium, and our prime minister at the time being a Junkanoo prime minister, I could tell you what I would have done if I was the prime minister, and I know that I'm a Junkanooer. I would have said to the Chinese, listen, my country's #1 cultural expression is Junkanoo, and right now the Junkanoo parade has outgrown its current venue. And if you are, as the Chinese, willing to give us a gift, how can we include in this gift by building the stadium and also building a Junkanoo cultural village or community at the same time? And here's what I'm thinking. I know when I saw the stadium being built, I said, you know what? I said to myself, as a Junkanoo, this would have been a prime time for us to build the Junkanoo Cultural Village. Build it big enough for the track to be in the middle, or somehow for it to encompass an actual route around the stadium with walls for the acoustics to bounce off, and bleachers bleachers inside this where it can actually host a Junkanoo route, a parade route, as well as the stadium. But you could get the architects to design it some way or the other. But what the prime minister should have done is say, listen, if you're going to build me a stadium, let me get the minds, or the minds that can put together a stadium and encompass a Junkanoo village at the same time, whereas we could have the bleachers, the Junkanoo parade route, as well as a stadium for track and field. But I would like to encourage anybody who is contemplating or thinking about rushing. First of all, Junkanoo is addictive. Junkanoo, once you decide that you're going to experience the whole rushing experience, you have to make up in your mind that it is an addictive experience. You rush once, you're going to want to rush over and over again. It's almost like a drug. It's like a high you're on, and each parade you try to better or improve on that high. So if you're contemplating on rushing, I would like to strongly encourage you just to experience it once. Experience it once. If you're going to experience it with the Valley Boys. Allow Junkanoo to be that catalyst or that avenue where you express yourself, where you channel all your energy and your time and your talents away from the ills of the country. I'm proud to know that I'm the father of 2 Junkanoo enthusiasts. I have 2 sons. Justin, he's now 18, and Aaron, he's now 14. Aaron is more of the actual Junkanoo participant. He's a Junkanoo, but Justin is more of a spectator. He loves everything about Junkanoo. But I'm proud to know that I have offsprings that I can leave a legacy to. I can pass this Junkanoo experience that has embodied me for all of my 48 years. And I'm proud to know that my children have a liking and are enthused and have an interest in Junkanoo, and it's proud as a father to know that you can pass this on to your children. Right now, my son Aaron, he is an up-and-coming Valley Boys drummer, and he just loves beating the drum. He's very talented with the drums. He beats the tom-tom for the Valley Boys. And my son Justin, he's more of Junkanoo statistics. He can tell you who won which parade, who won which best choreograph, best costume, best. He's more of a he's more involved in the statistics of Junkanoo, and he really loves to decorate. So he's more of a tricker. He likes to trick up the costumes. But speaking from the heart, I am so proud to be a Bahamian. I'm proud to be a Junkanooer. I'm proud to say that I am Junkanoo. The Valley Boys is the best group in the world.